Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Several people sent me an interesting story out of Arizona. And the headline is an attention grabber, but there's reasoning behind it, and it's a bizarre story the way it all comes out. Arizona judge rules that law enforcement is not a profession. So you hear about somebody and what their profession is. If they're in law enforcement, is that a profession? And the judge has said, no, that is not a profession, which has upset some people in law enforcement. But wait till you see how they got there. So from azcentral.com, E.J. Montini wrote the story. Bill, Mark, and Ernest all sent it to me. The idea was not to, insult the entire law enforcement community in the state, but a judge just did that in Arizona. The idea was challenging the makeup of Arizona's Board of Executive Clemency. So you know that there are people out there who are in prison who perhaps might be executed or they might be facing some very serious time in prison, and they are asking for clemency. They want the governor to cut them loose or cut them some slack. And so first you go up here before that board, and then the board makes a recommendation. Well, here's the thing. The legal representatives of a man on death row filed a petition with the court saying that the board itself was illegally constituted. That is, it had too many people from the same profession in it because there are rules about how many people from any given profession can be in it. Okay? And they were saying it has too many former law enforcement professionals on it. According to state law, no more than 2 members from the same professional discipline shall be members of the board at the same time. So the board could have, 2 doctors, presumably 2 lawyers, 2 engineers, 2 architects, but you couldn't have a board of all architects because that would be mayhem. So the man who wrote the story here, E.J. Montini, says this is a good rule. It's one of the rare instances of common sense from our state lawmakers, and you do want the board to be made up of a cross-section, I would think, of people from different walks of life. You don't want it all being one group of people. So he said it's a good rule. The idea is to fill the board seats with a cross-section of the citizenry, since the group will be making life or death decisions, literally life or death decisions. So in Arizona, the governor can commute a death sentence, but can only do so if the clemency board recommends it. So first, you got to go before the board, and if they recommend it, then boom, you're good to go. The board needs to have 5 members, but right now 1 seat is vacant, and 3 of the other seats are filled with men who spent their lives in law enforcement. So the question is, are these law enforcement guys formerly professional law enforcement guys? Was that their profession? Well, the judge said no. So meanwhile, 2 of these guys here retired from the Phoenix Police Department, and one of them spent years working for different agencies within the same profession. And that, of course, is when he thought that law enforcement was a profession. So the Superior Court Judge, Stephen Hopkins, said that historically, law enforcement has not been thought of as a profession. And this is one of those things that you can get at this all day long. And I suspect that, hang on a second. I'm breaking out the OEDs, my friend. Breaking out the OEDs. I suspect that this is a situation where the legislature would have been well advised to define in the statute what they meant when they said people from the same profession. Because there's going to be a whole bunch of definitions with respect to the dictionary. And then there's going to be a whole bunch of people fighting over it. And so they should have simply defined it. So I understand that OED, by the way, is kind of old-fashioned because it's looks at the history of the language. So quite often it's got some old definitions, but it'll have new definitions also. Profession. That's not the right one. Hang on. Not that one either. Not that one either. Hang on. Whoa. It's a whole bunch of them here. Well, profession starts with the declaration. You can make a profession of something. You say something, right? Solemn declaration. A particular order of monks, nuns, or other professed persons Let's see here. Act of professing. We're looking for the noun, of course. The occupation which one professes to be skilled in and to follow. A vocation in which a professed knowledge of some department of learning or science is used in its application to the affairs of others. So that would sound like you don't need to have like a license to be professional or to be practicing a profession. But that, of course, that's just the OED dictionary definition. And so what we're looking at here is what makes someone practicing a profession, right? So because every single law enforcement this writer has come into contact with over the years, they've studied criminal justice, they've gone through rigorous training, they've spent years and sometimes decades developing their skills and expertise, they do consider themselves involved in a profession, a universally recognized profession of law enforcement. I'm a law enforcement professional. And I think if somebody told you that I consider myself to be a law enforcement professional, I think that most people would say, yeah, that's profession, like anything else, But no, judge says no. The judge said of the non-profession of law enforcement, it is not regulated as other professions are and has little of the characteristics of what is typically considered a profession. Now, many people in my audience are going to say, Steve, we know it's not regulated because look what's happening out there. Well, there is some regulation. Depends on what state you're in. But we talked about states where police officers actually have to be licensed by the state. Many of them do attend academies and get training and take tests to graduate in the academy. So I would not have been surprised to see the judge go the other way on this. But by ruling this way, he's saying it's okay for there to be 3 or 4 or possibly even 5 ex-police officers on this board because they're not practicing any profession at all when they're practicing law enforcement. So this must have come as a shock to the Phoenix Police Department, which presumably will now disband its Professional Standards Bureau, which it actually has, since according to that particular court ruling, the officers are not professionals. Meanwhile, the lawyers for the inmate are contemplating an appeal of the judge's ruling, which would result in the first time ever that the entire law enforcement community joined forces with a death row inmate. And that's interesting because they'd all be on the same side for once. And so this is one of those situations where you see how it got there. Who would have ever thought that would happen? But I've spoken before about what courts are supposed to do when they run into a situation where you're looking at a statute and the way it's written and you go, is that really what the legislature intended as the outcome? What do they want this to do? And I would have thought that when they said they wanted people to be from different professions, that they would have said we wouldn't want 5 ex-cops on the parole board for obvious reasons, or the clemency board. And we wouldn't want, just 5 dentists. Nothing wrong with them, but you want to have some mixture of people in there. And so the idea that, well, no, you could have 5 cops because they're not practicing a profession. You're implying that they don't have anything in common. And they do. And I would imagine that's what the legislature is looking at when they thought of profession. Getting people from different jobs, different occupations, different walks of life. But if they didn't define it in the statute, then here we are. A judge gets to define it. So I think it's an odd result. It seems to me that this would not have been what the legislature was looking for. So there's a couple things that could happen here. That this could go up on appeal, and an appellate court could look at it and do a little more deconstruction on what was actually meant by the legislature. Or the legislature could fix it. And I don't know if they'll do that or not, but they could fix it by simply inserting into the statute a definitional section saying, here's what we mean by profession. Give some examples and just say, well, these are not an exhaustive list, but here's some examples of professions that we're thinking of. Teachers, accountants, law enforcement officials, that kind of thing. So it's an interesting case. Bill, Mark, and Ernest all sent it to me. We'll see what happens if it goes up on appeal. From azcentral.com, E.J. Montini wrote it for the Arizona Republic. Arizona judge rules that law enforcement is not a profession. Strange. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Tried calling the tinnitus helpline. No answer. It just kept ringing.